I'm a partner at the Legacy Group. I apologize in advance because my voice is cracking. My 4-year-old had me out late trick-or-treating last night and eating candy, and I woke up this morning and my voice is going. But I'm not sick, so nothing to worry about there. So I am a partner at the Legacy Group. And I'm a registered financial planner. We are a fully holistic, fee-based financial planning firm. We have 3 offices, one which is right next door, here in Hauppauge, literally in the building next door. We have another office in Syosset, and we have an office in Astoria, Queens as well. So let's jump in to tonight's presentation, which is common money mistakes. So just a little disclaimer that my compliance department asks that I say, so none of the information in here is meant to serve as specific tax or legal advice, right? All the information we talk about in this class, as well as other classes we do at this library and others, is high level. It's meant to speak to the masses. Before making any individual decisions for yourself, you should make sure you speak to your advisors who are familiar with your situation. So what is financial well-being? Just a good place to start. Right, there's 4 key cornerstones that we like to keep in mind when we talk about what does it mean to be in a financially well spot. The first is making sure that you have control over day-to-day and month-to-month expenses. Right? The second is having the capacity to absorb a financial shock. We're going to talk more about that later on. Being on track to meet your financial goals. Everybody has different goals. Some people want to retire. Some people want to retire early. Some people want to make sure that they have money to pay for college or, pass down to the next generation. Whatever your specific goal is, everybody is different, making sure you're on track to meet those. And then lastly, having the financial freedom to make choices that allow one to enjoy life, right? To live the lifestyle that we all want to live. All right. So the agenda for today, what this class is designed for, and this is really meant to be fun. And, I hope to have some fun with everybody here tonight. And one thing I'll say as well is I do a lot of these kinds of workshops, and the more successful ones are the ones where you guys participate. You guys ask questions, you make comments. This is not meant to be for me speaking to you as a monologue for the next 45 to 60 minutes. This is meant to be interactive. So please ask questions. The only thing I would say is if you have a specific question that pertains to your own financial situation, maybe ask that one to me at the end of the class. But anything general that can be helpful for you, as well as maybe helpful for someone else who is not thinking of that question, please ask away. So that being said, the preceding 10 to 15 slides are essentially going to go over 52 common money mistakes that a lot of people make at some point in their life. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the 52 and we're going to spend some time, more on some, less on others, talking about it. Some of them are going to be self-explanatory and you're going to scratch your head and kind of say, well, duh. Others might be things that you've never thought about before. All right. If we tried to classify those 52 into different, general buckets, you'll see that that's what's listed here is these 4. Just let these folks in. You coming in? Okay, no problem. Just want to make sure they get their folders. So if we look at the 4 that are there, the first is managing finances. So the first 15 to 20 are going to kind of fall into that bucket. The second is mitigating financial setbacks. The third is staying on track, mainly staying on track to meet your different financial goals. And the fourth is going to be in making decisions. Give you guys a folder here. Okay. No problem. Get a pen as well. You're welcome.
Thank you.
No problem. So let's jump in. So under the managing finances umbrella, let's talk about the first common money mistakes that we see. The first is not having a budget. I see this a lot where I work with clients, and one of my especially clients that are in retirement or approaching retirement, one of the most important questions is, well, what are your expenses? And I can't tell you how many people kind of scratch their head and say, I don't have the slightest clue. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to know to the penny, this is what I spend every month, but to have some kind of general idea that if I add up all my big expenses, as well as some of my miscellaneous spending, what is actually going out each month and making sure that you're kind of staying on that budget, right? It's an important cornerstone of kind of where to start. It's very hard to kind of get ahead financially in life if you don't know what's going out on a monthly and annual basis. Spend more than what you make, right? Kind of self-explanatory, right? If I make 100 grand a year and I'm spending 120, I think we all know that that's not going to last long term before you find yourself in trouble. So making sure that you're spending below what you make, ideally saving 15 to 20% of what you make, and then spending what you have left over. Always buying new, right? There's a lot of people where, can you buy something used and have it be just as effective and potentially save a lot of money? Cars are an excellent example of this. You can get a car for sometimes 30 to 50% less, sometimes more, when you buy it used as opposed to new. So kind of making sure you're in tune to these kinds of things, especially when it comes to the big purchases. If you're going to go buy something that costs $50 and you buy it used for 25, is that good? Yes. But does it really move the needle much? And not so much, right? It's really more the bigger purchases when you're spending a lot of money on something like a car or something else along those lines, where buying it used could potentially save a tremendous amount of money. And then 4, not understanding the difference between want and need. Right? I argue with my wife about this all the time. And she's like, I need to go on a vacation. I need this pocketbook or whatever the case is. And I'm like, let's use the right word there, honey. You want it, right? And it's okay to want things. I want things too. But, it's easy to kind of bleed into, well, we need this versus what we want. Any questions so far? Any feedback? All right, so the next slide, talking about the next 4 items falling under the managing finances umbrella. So number 5 is misjudging big expenses, right? So, it's difficult to kind of get down to the penny what something's going to cost when it's small. And again, if it's small, it's not going to move the needle much. But when there's a big expense going out, it's important to get a handle on it. I'll give you an example. I had a client who went on a honeymoon, and actually, I'm sorry, it wasn't a honeymoon. It was a 10-year anniversary of their wedding, and they were expecting to spend X, and they ended up spending like double that because they didn't really, and it kind of put them behind the eight ball in terms of their savings budget, right? So there's a lot of things like that: buying cars, going on, big trips, buying homes, a lot of different things. These big purchases, these, sometimes milestone purchases in our life, it is important to take 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour to come down and really get an understanding of what this is going to cost, because otherwise sometimes you kind of get in too deep and before you realize what the true cost is, and that maybe has a adverse impact in other areas of your financial life. Failing to negotiate. This is also something that I joke around with my wife about, because when we're doing especially big projects, when we're doing something big, I say, what's the problem in asking if they could do a little better? She laughs at me. So sometimes just asking can save a lot of money. Not taking discounts, right? And then that one's pretty self-explanatory. And then paying unnecessary fees. Again, especially when it comes to big purchases, making sure you understand what all the different fees are, whether they're in plain sight or whether they're hidden, is important to know. Any questions, comments, concerns? Yeah, it's certainly not, that is a good exercise. And I would agree 100%, especially with what you said in the beginning, where understanding your expenses before going into retirement is absolutely critical. Because a lot of times when people say, well, can I afford to retire? It's like, well, it depends on how much money you need to live. Some people spend $2,000 a month in retirement, some spend 20. So depending on where you are in that spectrum and depending on how much assets you have is going to be critical in knowing, do you have enough to retire on? All right, so going to the next slide, not knowing the slow leaks. This again kind of goes back to one of the other items, and a lot of these kind of bleed into each other, of knowing what the budget is and knowing where money's going out. A perfect example of the slow leaks is, my own life, for example, is all the different streaming services I pay for. And knowing, well, I'm paying Showtime $10 a month, and I'm paying Netflix $16, and I'm paying this, and I'm paying that. And it's very easy to sign up. And the way things are organized in today's day and age, a lot of these things are done on a reoccurring basis. It's very easy to have a lot of things you're spending money on that when you sign up for it, you're like, this is really not a lot of money. Do I need to worry about it? But it compounds as more and more things add up and you do more and more of those. So again, just kind of being cognizant of what's going out on a monthly basis, really important. Not planning for irregular expenses. And this kind of goes back to the point that you made before, Miss, where it's like, okay, well, maybe I know my expenses are $5,000 a month, just to use a random example, but are you taking into account that at some point, you're going to need a new roof, right? Or a new kitchen or a new floor, or what if your car dies, or what if you get sick, or what if you get hurt, or, what if this happens or that happens, so we can't get our arms around every potential curveball that life can throw us, but we can factor in to say it's reasonable to expect that there are going to be some irregular expenses popping up from time to time. And if that does happen, what kind of impact does that have on my financial situation? Spending frivolously, right? Kind of one of those self-explanatory ones. Obviously, if we're spending too much money, more than what we make, and buying things that we really don't need, that can get us into trouble. And number 12, having too many never-ending payments, right? There's a lot of things that you can buy in, today's market, goods and services, that it's like, don't worry about it. We'll put you on a layaway plan. But my first question in that is, okay, well, when does that layaway plan end? And let me take out my calculator and understand what is this really costing me, right? Because it's, $50 a month sounds great, but $50 a month for 15 years maybe doesn't sound so great. So under managing finances, right, number 13 is not paying attention to interest rates. Very important, honestly, with what's going on in our economy, because interest rates are rising. So the cost of any kind of lending is going up, whether that means you're buying a home, whether it means you're getting a loan for school, whether you're talking about a credit card, whether you're talking about just a personal loan. All these things are getting more expensive, and more likely than not, they're going to continue to get more expensive over the short and potentially midterm. So making sure that you're paying attention to that, right? Before swiping the credit card or taking out a loan for whatever it may be, just understanding, well, what is the interest rate? Is it fixed, right? Is it variable? If it's fixed, how long is it fixed for? Is it fixed for the entire term of the loan, or is it fixed for 5 years and then it gets reevaluated? Kind of asking the question and then asking the follow-up question to really make sure you understand, well, what is this costing me? Doesn't mean that, you shouldn't do it necessarily, but it does mean that, you need to have the answers to all this stuff to make sure you understand if it's a good decision or not. Not reviewing monthly statements, right? So we all get statements in the mail for everything, and it's very easy to not look at it. It's important to look at those things, because a lot of times there's information in there that is very valuable for you to have to make sure that you're staying on track with your financial life. Missing payments. This is also one that kind of might be a little self-explanatory, but obviously falling behind on things is not a good thing, right? You definitely don't want to. It's hard enough to stay in a good position when everything's going well. You're digging yourself into a hole. Now, it's hard to get out of that hole. It's a lot easier to go deeper into it than it is to get out of it. So just never even going down that road is really the best way to do it. And then overspending on gifts. I talk to my mother-in-law about this all the time. She spends too much money on us and my daughter, her grandchild, and I tell her all the time, a card is fine. Don't have to spend all this money. It's very nice. It's very generous, but there's a lot of ways that I feel, at least there's a lot of ways we can show generosity, and it doesn't always have to be in something expensive if we can't afford it. All right, so now we're shifting into kind of a different set of topics, right, which is mitigating financial setbacks. Any questions or any comments before we keep going? So avoid the following money mistakes. 17, not having an emergency fund. Also one that might, for certain folks, seem self-explanatory, but a lot of folks say, okay, yeah, I have an emergency fund. And I say, okay, well, how much is in there? And they give me an answer. And I say, well, how many months, how many months of your expense does that cover? And they're like, 1. I'm like, well, it's not great emergency fund, right? The rule of thumb is that you should have 3 to 6 months worth of your expenses liquid in cash at all times, so that if you lose a job or you get sick or hurt or something like that, anything that could affect your income from coming in, you have 3 to 6 months to kind of figure it out, right? For certain folks, I'll get to you in 1 second, sure. For certain folks, they need a little more than that. If you find yourself more on the conservative side, maybe having 6 to 8 months or 6 to 9 months is good. Depending on what your income situation is. I work with a lot of business owners and a lot of self-employed individuals. I say for business owners, you need 9 to 12 months, right? Because their income is very volatile and there's a lot of factors that could affect their business. They could be doing really well one year and then really poorly the next, like that. And they need to have a lot of liquidity to support the ebbs and flows of their income. Yes, sir. Okay. No problem. So 3 to 6 months is general rule of thumb, sometimes more depending on what you do for a living and depending on what your emotional risk tolerance is. Having only one source of income, right, doesn't mean, right, like I'm in a household, my personal household is only one source of income. Doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It's just something that really has to be looked at to make sure, and you have to understand the risks. You have to know that if anything happens to that income, there's nothing to fall back on. So again, it kind of bleeds into 17. Maybe you have a higher emergency fund if you only have one source of income, to know that if that income goes away for whatever reason, you have a full year's worth of cash to support yourself. The bottom line with number 18 is that if you have multiple sources of income, whether that be a second job or whether that be a spouse working or whatever the case may be, it does lower the risk of something bad financially happening. Doesn't mean you can't make up for it in other areas to try to level out that risk, but you need to be cognizant of it, that when you only have one source of income coming in, there's extra steps that it's recommended you take to make sure you're not too exposed. 19, not understanding employer benefits. This is a common one that I see, where a lot of people have phenomenal benefits at corporations they work for, government jobs, and they either don't take advantage of it fully because they don't pay attention to it, or they don't even really know what they have. It's a perfect time of year to talk about it because most employers are going through open enrollment now. Typically October, November is when it's done. Spending 30 minutes when the open enrollment booklet comes in the mail to read through it, to understand what your benefits are, is so critical. And more often than not, I tell folks, when you have voluntary benefits or supplemental benefits that you can take advantage of through your employer, it's almost always a good idea to take advantage of the maximum amount that they're going to offer you. Because if you wanted to go get that kind of benefit on your own through a private organization, you're probably going to pay 5 to 10 times more doing it directly. You're getting a subsidized lower rate through your employer. It's a benefit. Take advantage of the benefit. It'd be like free money. And taking 30 minutes to read through it and understand, what it is that you're getting is important. This also goes for government benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, things like that, Social Security. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but understanding whether it's a government benefit or a benefit you get from your employer, understanding the ins and out of it is very critical. And then carrying too much credit card debt, also kind of one that's self-explanatory. Credit card debt is the worst kind of debt to possibly have, right? There's not a lot of other places I can go take a loan out and get a 20% interest rate or a 26% interest rate. I mean, it could really be egregious in certain circumstances. So it's not good debt to have. What I do like with credit cards is what I do, where everything goes on a credit card and then every month it gets paid off. So no interest goes to the credit card company. Like I'm like their worst nightmare, because they've never made $1 in interest on me, but yet every year I get to go on a free vacation because of all the points that I rack up, or I get to buy stocking stuffers of Amazon gift cards to put in the stockings of my employees and family members that they pay for. So credit cards can do good, but you have to have a lot of discipline to make sure you're not falling into a situation where you got revolving debt on them and that debt is costing you a lot of money. Any questions? Any comments? Oh yeah, absolutely. I love it. I love it. I'm waiting to get a letter in the mail that says, Mr. Wilkow, we're removing your card. I'm waiting for that letter, but I'm going to keep taking advantage of it until I get it. All right. So moving along, still under the topic of mitigating financial setbacks. 21, not having an income protection plan. So what this kind of means, it can mean a lot of different things, but what the most common item that this is referring to. Okay, before I give you the answer, let me ask you guys a question. What do you think is the #1 reason why Americans fall into debt? Anybody have an idea? You got it. Getting sick or hurt is the #1 reason why Americans fall into debt. Most people, and especially a lot of young people, don't ever think anything bad's going to happen. I'm never going to get sick. I'm never going to get hurt. Nobody at 25 thinks maybe I'm going to get cancer when I'm 40 or 50 years old. And, how am I going to deal with that? Right. And because a lot of them don't understand what their benefit package is at work, they don't know that their disability coverage in a lot of situations is very, very limited. And they don't think about their disability coverage until the day they're ready to put a claim in. And it could be an awful surprise for a lot of folks to be like, holy smokes, I didn't realize that my coverage was lacking. What am I going to do? And it's kind of a double whammy, because when you get sick, typically your bills go up because you have medical expenses now. And depending on your healthcare coverage, that can get very expensive, and then your income goes down. So it could be very, very financially destructive. So what 21 is referring to is making sure that you look at these things and say, well, what can I do to prevent that? A lot of times it's a simple answer. A lot of times in that benefit booklet, you can sign up for more coverage at for like $2 a week or something very, very minimal. That's why I say take advantage of those things. If your employer doesn't offer something like that, consider taking out a disability policy, right? It's more insurance, there's more premium. It does elevate your cost, which is not fun. But if you ever need it, it's going to be one of the best financial decisions you've ever made to have that policy. I think the stat is, don't quote me on this, but I think the stat is that 1 in 4 Americans go on disability claim at some point in their working career, from early 20s to mid 60s. 1 in 4 at some point go on claim. So making sure that you either have it through your employer, or if you don't, consider buying coverage on your own is really, really important. 22, not having enough life insurance. Another very common thing that we see, where you say, okay, well, I have a $500,000 policy, so we're good. We'll say, okay, well, how much is your mortgage? Well, my mortgage is 600 grand. Well, how much do you make? I make $150,000 a year. How old are your kids? We just had a baby. We have a 2-year-old. We have a 4-year-old. $500,000 is going to go like that for somebody in that situation. Sounds like a lot of money, but it's going to go like that. The general rule of thumb with life insurance is that you want to replace 70% of your income until your youngest child is age 22 to 25, depending on how you feel about that. So for a lot of folks, $1 million is like a minimum. A lot of folks, it can be 2 million. And for higher earning families, it can be even more than that. So making sure you have enough life insurance is critical. And then even if you don't have dependents anymore, there's a lot of situations where even in retirement, there's a lot of benefits to having permanent coverage. So I'll give an example. Having permanent life insurance could be effective for people that with pensions. When you sign up for your pension and you're ready to take advantage of it, they're going to ask you a question if you want a single life or you want a joint life. The single life payment can give you a lot more income in retirement, but the fear is, well, what if I do that and then a year later I pass away, right? My spouse is going to need that income. Well, if you had permanent life insurance, a lot of times you can take the single life, because if God forbid you do pass away prematurely, the life insurance is going to pay your spouse and they're going to use that. And that's an unlikely situation. Just based, depending on your health, that's an unlikely situation. So you can kind of take on some additional risk because of the insurance that you have in place. Any questions there so far on those topics? Okay. 23, having too much financial complexity. So, if you need like a CFO to figure out your financial situation, it's probably too complex. There is value in keeping it simple, and there is value in sometimes less is more. And then making rush decisions. My personal rule of thumb is that for any important decision, I am not making it right on the spot. I am at least waiting 24 hours, because in that 24-hour period of time, more often than not, something occurs to me that I say, well, maybe I should take a little bit of a different stance on this decision. Any questions on these? Okay. Staying on track. Avoid the following money mistakes. All right, so this kind of shifts into a different set of topics. 25 is not having financial goals. It's important to have goals, right? Whatever they may be. Big ones like retirement, small ones could be like taking a trip, and everything in between. But having some kind of goal, financial goal to work towards, is important. I think where people fall into trouble with number 25 a lot is that they don't have goals at the specific moment. So because they don't have goals, they don't really save. They don't really do a lot, because they say, well, I don't really have anything to save for, but that doesn't mean in the future you're not going to have goals and you're not going to regret not having put money aside. Which leads into number 26, not saving for the future, right? Irregardless of whether you have goals or not, whether they're small goals or whether they're big goals, making sure that you're allocating part of your income towards saving for the future is critical. General rule of thumb is that you want to save 15 to 20% of your income for long-term investing. If you're a business owner, it's 25%. Number 27, not automating savings. This can be especially problematic for business owner clients because their income is so volatile in a lot of situations, but having some kind of automatic savings is really critical, because more often than not, when you say, I'll figure it out at the end of the year, and I'm going to take this, the goal is to take this amount of money and put it into savings at the end of the year. Sometimes the end of the year comes and goes and you don't do it. And that could fall into a bad habit. And then one day you wake up and you realize you have a lot less than what you were hoping to have. By automating your savings, you don't even feel it sometimes, right? This is really like impactful for people that have access to 401ks at work, where your paycheck, it's already taken out of your paycheck by the time you get it. You don't even realize you're saving for it, but yet a big pot of money is just being built and built and built and built over here for your benefit. Automating savings is very, very impactful. 28, not taking advantage of your full employer 401k match. Right? Does everybody here understand how a 401k match works? Okay. So just to explain it very quickly, if you make $100,000 a year, to use an easy number, and your employer offers a 5% 401k match, what that means is if you elect to put 5% into your 401k, that's $5,000 a year, right? Your employer will match that $5,000. So at the end of the year, $10,000 goes in. That's your money. It's free money that your employer, it's a bonus that your employer is willing to give you. You just have to contribute to your 401k to get that bonus, the free money. If you only put 2% in, 2,000, they're only going to match up to 2%. So they're going to match you dollar for dollar up until 5%. Doesn't mean you can't put more than 5% in, right? You can put 10 grand in, 15 grand, 20 grand in. They're just going to cap it at 5%. So in this example, $5,000. So whenever there is a employer match on a 401k, it is always recommended that you put in to the, to maximize that match. So if it's a 5% match, you're putting 5% in. If it's a 3% match, you're at least putting 3% in. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing more. At a minimum, you should be doing that amount to take the free money. Does that make sense? Okay. For any kind of 401k or retirement plan, when the withdrawals are made in retirement, it's taxed as income. It gets 100% of it gets taxed. The only time it wouldn't is if it's like a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA, then it wouldn't be taxed. But all the money that goes in it is a tax deduction. So I put money in my 401k, I save money on taxes in the here and now, right? It goes into the account, it gets invested, it grows tax deferred, meaning that if there's gains in the account in any given year, I don't have to pay taxes on it. It all gets reinvested, which is very impactful, by the way. That tax deferred nature is not something to be overlooked. It can be a difference of hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in certain circumstances. But when you take the money out in retirement, the IRS will tax you on the money. That answer your question? A Roth never gets taxed. So this is just talking about a regular 401k. So with a match, the employer is involved. So when a match is offered, if you put $5,000 in hypothetical example, you put 5 in, your employer puts 5 in. So it can be a Roth. The only difference with a Roth is that the money that you put in is not going to count as a tax deduction. You're going to pay taxes on the income. You're going to put after-tax money in there, but it'll grow tax-free. And when you take the money out in retirement, it will not be taxed. It is deferred, and it does grow tax. Yes, and it does grow tax-free. That is correct. That's in a Roth example. Most 401ks, most people, I think the stat is like 70 to 80% of IRAs and 401ks are traditional. So with traditional 401ks, all the money goes in, counts as a tax deduction, not your employer match. That's not a deduction for you, but whatever you put in is a deduction, grows tax deferred. All the money that gets taken out in retirement will be taxed. And there are what are called RMDs, required minimum distributions, which at age 72, roughly age 72, the IRS will force you to start taking money out because they want to tax you on it. There aren't RMDs for Roth IRA accounts. There are RMDs for Roth 401k accounts. Yes. Yeah. You automatically got a deduction when you put the money in. So at the end of the year, well, you probably got a statement at the end of the year that you gave to your CPA each year who filed your taxes, and then you had to make sure that you claim the deduction, yeah, in every given year. Yeah. Only in a Roth 401k do you have RMDs. If you have a IRA Roth, a Roth IRA, you do not have RMDs. Yeah, yeah, very unique. Mm-hmm. Chances are the transfer is going to happen into a Roth IRA. So you'll have a Roth IRA that's established. The money goes from your 401k or your IRA to your Roth. You pay the tax at that time. You never have to pay tax ever again on it. You never have an RMD on it. As long as it's a Roth IRA that it's being transferred into. Okay. So going to the next slide. On the same topic of staying on track, number 29 is only having a short-term outlook. So I see this a lot. I see it a lot, especially with young professionals who they're, retirement's 30 years away, or, my kid's only 3, I don't have to worry about college for 15 years. Like, things happen quick, and to not, you know, we encourage clients to look at things in 3 ways. There's short term, there's midterm, and there's long term. Neither one, none is more important necessarily than the other. They're all important, and you have to be looking at things in those 3 uh, classifications at all time. And they're usually, for most folks, is goals and things that need to be listed in those different classifications that we need to be working towards. So, taking a step back and zooming out and kind of thinking, okay, well, what is the big picture? What are my longer term goals is important. Number 30, not changing plans with the times. I say this a lot to clients, that financial planning is not a one and done. You don't kind of create a plan for yourself or work with a professional who helps you create a plan and set it and forget it. Finances are a fluid thing for a lot of different reasons. So that plan at a minimum has to be reviewed on a yearly basis to make sure that, whatever changes are happening in your life, whatever changes are happening in the economy that maybe impact you, things need to be, moved around in certain circumstances. 31, paying the wrong debts first, right? So not all debt is created equal. Your mortgage and your credit card debt are not the same kind of debt, right? So there's bad debt, there's okay debt, and then there's good debt, that a lot of people would argue. Making sure that you're paying the bad debt, the ones with the highest interest rate, the ones that don't have any kind of financial benefit, like there's no tax deduction, right? Your mortgage is tax deductible. A lot of times student loans are tax deductible depending on your income. So making sure the ones that aren't offering any kind of financial benefit, that have high interest rates, paying those first and then working your way down. And then furthermore, there's a school of thought out there, and I'm not saying I'm for it or against it. It really depends on each client situation. But with some of the interest rates that we had in the last 2 years, there was a lot of people that refinanced and they got rates of 2.7%, 2.8%. When money is that cheap to lend and you're getting tax benefits by keeping that debt on the books, you got to question, does it make sense to pay that mortgage off faster, or can that cash flow be redirected to something else that is going to have a better long-term outlook for you? So it's not a one size fits all. It's a very dynamic situation that really has to be examined closely. But in a lot of situations, not paying that debt off can be more beneficial. Number 32, prolonging debt repayment time, right? So kind of, going to the opposite of 30. I'll give you an example. I've seen it where clients, they keep refinancing too much, and then they refinance and take money out and refinance and take more money out. And now they're going into retirement with an exorbitant mortgage. A lot of times that may not be a good situation, right? Because, you keep refinancing and getting these new loans, you're paying the debt forever. Yeah. Yes. Yep. That is 100% correct. And, the bank is not acting as a fiduciary, right? They don't have to do what's in your best interest. They only have to do what's in their best interest. Doesn't mean that they're bad, right? Everybody needs to make a living, but keeping that in mind that, they're trying to sell you something, as opposed to acting in a fiduciary capacity where legally they have to do what's in your best interest, not what's in theirs. Number 33, borrowing from retirement accounts, right? So it's usually not advisable to take money out of a retirement account when you're not in retirement. Unless it's for a qualified expense, you're going to pay taxes on it and you're going to pay a penalty as well. So unless you really, really need the money for a really, really good reason, typically it's better to look to other places to get, as opposed to from your retirement account. Even if it is a qualified expense, doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It's just got to be examined very carefully to say, is it a good idea for me to pull from my retirement? Because what you don't want to do is rob Peter to pay Paul. And okay, yes, I took from my retirement to pay this qualified expense, but now I'm behind on my retirement, right? Did you really get ahead? All right. So taking from retirement accounts really has to be very closely looked at if you're not in retirement. 34, not understanding retirement costs. This is a big one. Kind of goes back to in the beginning, us talking about expenses. Well, can I afford to retire? Well, what are your expenses? I don't know. That's the first thing that we got to get a handle on to see if you can afford to retire. So really getting an understanding of what the cost of retirement is going to be. That includes not only your day-to-day expenses, it includes your irregular expenses, like what if the roof goes at some point in my retirement? How am I going to pay for something like that? Also goes for, what if, God forbid, I have like a long-term care event? How is that going to be paid for? Right? Or how would we deal with a situation like that? Kind of thinking through these different things that happen. They happen a lot, to making sure that you're getting a true picture of what the cost is going to be, is going to allow you, or with the help of a professional, to tell you, hey, here's, you are in a good position to retire, and here is what your risks are. 35, having no retirement distribution strategy. You see this a lot as well, where sometimes people have done a really great job saving. They got a ton of money to retire on. They're like, I don't have the slightest clue on the best way to take money out and to pay for my retirement. I have no idea how the things are taxed. Should I take money from here? Should I take money from there? I don't know how much money is too much. What if there's a down market? Should I take money or should I not take money? Not having a strategy to deal with all of that. The strategy to make sure that you're not overpaying in taxes by taking too much from one account versus another account, making sure that you're not in a situation where you're selling investments at a loss to pay for your retirement, having a strategy to make sure in a down market, here's where we pull from versus there, and taking all these factors into consideration is critical to make sure that that nest egg that you've worked your entire life to build is going to be maximized, and you're going to have the best retirement possible. And if it's important to you, to maximize the legacy you leave for your family. 36, not understanding Social Security. I find that most people that are approaching Social Security, they do a pretty good job of researching it and knowing it pretty well, but not everybody. And understanding the ins and outs of how Social Security works, what's the pros versus cons of taking early Social Security versus late Social Security. It's important to understand to get a good retirement picture. And now, what did I say before? Not changing plans with the times. So that falls under that one, when the government likes to throw a curveball at us. So not understanding Social Security, number 36. So now we shift into making decisions. Number 37, not talking about money with your partner. This is a common one. Or sometimes I'll meet with one spouse versus the other, and they're like, well, I don't know how much they have in that account, or I don't know what they're doing, or that. You don't necessarily have to know every penny that, everybody's spending, but making sure there's a line of communication and that you're on the same page. Making sure that your financial goals and your spouse's financial goals align, making sure the timelines align. These are important things to make sure you're on the same page, because if you're not, it can result in issues later on. Financial issues, right? We're not talking about relationship issues, but financial issues. 38, not getting professional financial advice. There's a good book that I read when I first started. I'm a partner at the Legacy Group, and so I'm self-employed. I own part of the business. And when I was going down an entrepreneurial path, one of my other partners, he recommended this book to me, Who Not How. And it's a great book, and it's geared towards entrepreneurs. And the basic message of the book is, even if you can do it yourself, if you can pay somebody to do it and they're going to do a better job and you're going to get time back in your life, there's value in that. So there's no set rule to say, always hire somebody versus not hire somebody. But when it comes to important financial decisions and plans, having a third party that does this for a living can have a lot of value, especially if you have a little bit of a complex situation. 39, not being knowledgeable about finances. So, I love that we were talking about in the beginning of the class, love that this high schooler kid put these things up all across the room about financial literacy. Because there's a lot of adults that probably don't know a lot of these things. And it's a systemic issue, I think, in our society. And I think there's a lack of education, especially for young people, when it comes to financial topics. But doing a little research, reading a book, watching a YouTube video, reading an article, asking friends, talking to a professional. These are little things that we can all do to make sure that we, have the literacy with these important items. You have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you had your hand raised. Number 40, waiting to get started on your finances, right? Very common issue with young people. I'll do it next year. I'll do it next year. I'll do it next year. They kick the can down the road for too long. And a lot of times they regret it later in life. And it's not just young people. A lot of times it's people that are older too, and they're approaching retirement. And they're like, oh, I'll think about how I'm going to retire next year. And then before you know it, it's here. And you don't have a plan, and maybe you develop a plan, and maybe there's some surprises in that plan. So, the general rule of thumb when it comes to finances is just, having an eye on the ball and having your finger on the pulse, really at a consistent time, whether you're young or whether you're old. It's something that just is kind of a constant in life that needs to be paid attention to. Yeah, gifting strategies is what you're talking about. Gifting strategies is what you're talking about. And it's a very common estate question that comes up is, are there tax benefits for me to gift it while I'm still alive versus for me to wait until it's probatable, right? Or it gets passed via will. There's no cookie cut answer to that. It depends on your financial situation. Certain times it makes sense to gift. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to gift. There's a lot of factors at play. There's a lot of issues with it. So not only gifting it, but gifting it outright can sometimes be the question of whether you gift it to the person just outright, or do you put it into a trust for their benefit, right? Spendthrift issues, right? If you're concerned that whoever you're going to gift it to is not going to do the right thing with the money, right? Depends on how much you're looking to gift, because if you're gifting over certain thresholds, there could be additional taxes that get triggered that way, which could be bypassed if you wait until you pass away to have it given. 16,500 a year per person. No, it might be going up next year, but this year it's 16,500. Yeah, per person. No, per person. So this gentleman can give 16,500. You can give, let's just say, you want to gift money to me. He can give 16,500. You can give 16,500. So I can get a total of $33,000. Yes. You can gift that 16,500 to as many people as you want. If you have 30 people and you each want to gift, and you want to give 16,500 to each one of those 30 people, you can do that. Yes. Yes. Yeah, there's no tax that gets triggered for that 16,500. Not necessarily. So if your accountant can fill out what's called a 709 form, it goes into what's called your unified credit, where each person can pass up to $12 million estate tax free to the next generation. So unless you're a very, very high net worth individual and you have an estate more than $12 million, it's not something you need to worry about. However, those laws, as brought up before, change very frequently, and they are changing in the next few years. They're going to go from 12 million down to 6 million. So there's a lot of factors at play. Again, kind of going back to that question, there's a lot of factors at play that need to be analyzed to see, well, what is the best gifting strategy? And it depends on your financial situation. It also depends on the kind of asset you want to gift. Is this money coming out of an IRA where as soon as you pull it out, it's going to get taxed? Is this money coming out of a business? Is it coming out of real estate? Is it coming out of a taxable account? Is it coming out of a nonprofit organization? There's a lot of different factors in play that need to be looked at to kind of decide, well, what's the best gifting strategy, right? You absolutely can. Yes, you absolutely can gift that 16,500. And we could talk after the class, you know, for any specific questions you have for your circumstance. Okay. Yes. So that's another point, that, you know, defunding your estate so that creditors, whether it be the IRS or whether it be a nursing home, don't have access to it. But there's other ways to do that as well. You know, utilizing things like trusts and things like that is a common way. So, you know, because as soon as you gift the money, it's not yours anymore. If you ever need it back. So, you know, sometimes putting it in trust can be a better option, because when you pass away, that beneficiary is still going to get the money, but you don't lose control and you can still access it if you needed it. Yes. And that's a great way to, but not necessarily, because if you put it into that trust, even after you're gone, you have control over how that money's distributed. They can't take that money and go buy a Ferrari with it. There's certain, you can design the trust, obviously with the help of an attorney, you could design the trust so that they could only access money for certain qualified expenses. And it could be vague, you know, it could be like anything health wise, anything education wise, anything maintenance wise that falls under these parameters, but they can't use this money to buy luxury goods or this or that, or use it for vacations. And there's an attorney that oversees that trust to make sure even after you're gone, that it's being, you know, the trust rules are being enforced. Yes. A charitable, I think what you mean is a CRAT, a charitable retainer annuity trust. Is that what you're referring to? Whatever it is. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're correct. You've gifted it. You've gifted it. No, it depends. So gifting money to charity, typically it's something, if you're high net worth, and it kind of goes back down to like an estate tax conversation. So if you're high net worth and you do have an estate tax issue that you're worried about when the asset gets ready to get passed to the next generation, gifting money to charities while you're still alive, or designing a trust so that a portion of your assets go to that charity upon your death, can have really remarkable tax benefits from an estate tax perspective. But there's a lot of factors at play. The very simple version of it is you can give money to a charity, get a tax deduction receipt, and that can offset some of your taxes in a given year. So a common thing that a lot of retirees do is when RMDs kick in, I know I'm going to have to take this money out of my IRA, and I don't necessarily need all the money, but I'm going to get taxed on it. So I can potentially funnel money into a charity, get a tax deduction, which is going to help offset the taxes I'll owe on my required minimum distributions. That's a strategy that a lot of people utilize. But again, it's very complex. It's not a cookie cutter, it's good or it's bad. It really depends on this, a lot of different factors in a client situation to determine if that makes sense or not. Yes. Uh, so gifting money to charity is tax deductible typically up until a certain amount. I don't know what the latest amount is, but it can be structured in a way where there can be massive tax incentives, even if you wanted to gift a tremendous amount of money. And churches do qualify as, when you, yes, exactly. So, all right, continuing on with the list. I think we were up to waiting to get started on your finances we talked about. So let's go to the next page. So number 41, not watching your credit score. Kind of a self-explanatory one as well. Just making sure you're in tune to what your credit score is. 42, not diversifying your assets. This comes up a lot. A lot of people, because they like one style of investment, whether that be real estate or whether it be certain kinds of stocks or whatever the case may be, they funnel all their money into that one thing. And there's a lot of risk in doing that, because if that one asset class doesn't perform so well in the future, a lot of your net worth is tied to that one thing. So having diversification, not just in your stock market investments, but there's multiple layers of diversification. There's diversification in your investments, your traditional stock market based investments, making sure you have certain stocks that are aggressive versus certain stocks that are value versus certain stocks that are dividends, making sure you have different types of bonds that are integrated into your portfolio. But then also making sure the next layer of diversification is making sure that you have different buckets of money that are taxed in different ways, right? All my money is in a 401k and all of that's going to be taxed when I pull it out. And I'm going to have to take RMDs on that. Maybe there's value in having some money in a 401k, some money in an account that doesn't get taxed, like a Roth or other options that are out there. Having some money in accounts that are partially taxable. So having different types of accounts that are taxed in different ways is another level of diversification to make sure you're not paying too much money in taxes, right? Also asset classes, right? Having money in real estate, having money in stock market based investments, having money in fixed income style investments that are not correlated to the health of the economy, real estate, or the stock market, that are going to grow at a guaranteed interest rate. Having all these different levels of diversification is very, very impactful. And typically folks that diversify on that caliber that I described over a long period of time, their wealth is going to grow at an accelerated rate in most cases, as opposed to folks that concentrate their wealth in just a few things. Number 43, and we already started talking about this, not having a will or an estate plan. So critical. So critical. So many people do not have a will. I'd probably say most people, in fact, do not have a will. Yeah, most people don't have a will. And certainly if there's a good amount of assets, making sure that you have an estate plan. Really, anybody that has children and or assets should have a will, right? The complexity of that will depends on your situation. But if you have children, you need a will. If you have assets, you need a will. 44, having out-of-date beneficiary designations. So the most common example I see with this is person A marries person B. Person B is the beneficiary on their pension. They get divorced. Person A marries person C, never updates the pension beneficiary. Person A dies. Who do you think the pension's going to? Not good situation. Person C is not happy in that situation. It happens a lot. Beneficiary designations and accounts override whatever a will says. So even if you have a will and you say, leave it all to my wife, that beneficiary designation overrides the will. So that is critical, and it's so simple to do. Just looking at all your accounts and calling up who's the beneficiary on the account and making sure it's all accurate. Such a simple thing to do, so impactful. Yeah, so the trust has its own set of rules. That's a totally different, so if it's not in a trust, the beneficiary designation is very important. As soon as it crosses into the trust, the trust is its own entity that has its own set of rules. Yes. You actually, in order to have a trust, you need a will. You can't just have a trust. So like it kind of imagine it like you're stacking layers of planning, and like the first step is a will. Then the next step is a trust, and then there's other steps above that, but you can't skip to step 2. Say it again. What's your question? Yeah, it's a kind of will that has certain um provisions in it, but they're it's something different. It's something different. 45, paying only the minimum credit card debt. So this kind of goes back to carrying too much credit card debt. If you're just paying the minimum, it's probably going to take you 1,000 years to pay it off. I'm being facetious, obviously, there, but it's going to take a long time to pay it off. Making sure that you're contributing extra money above the minimum is critical. 46, spending too much on housing, right? This is also a common one where maybe you buy too much house, or it's taking up too large of a percentage of your overall income. 47, prioritizing your mortgage over other debt. So sometimes other debt is more important to pay off at a faster rate than a mortgage, is essentially what it's saying. And we kind of talked about that before. Excuse me. 48, prioritizing college funding over retirement. So this is a common one where we see where people take money out of their retirement accounts to pay for their children's college education. It's a difficult position to be in, but a lot of times paying, sacrificing your own retirement for your child's college education can, a lot of situations, be like robbing Peter to pay from Paul, and essentially you're not really getting ahead. The benefit with college is that there's a lot of loan options out there, and there's a lot of cheap loan options out there. There's tax benefits sometimes to carrying some of these loans. There's no loan options for your retirement. So in a lot of situations, it's going to be better to take loans out to pay for a child's college education as opposed to using your retirement assets. Yeah, absolutely. 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 49, not reading the fine print, making sure you fully understand. We talked about this in the beginning, fully understand what is this actually going to cost me. 50, making decisions based on emotions and not facts, right? This kind of goes back to my rule that if it's a big decision, I'm waiting at least 24 hours before answering it, because you're letting the emotions come down and you're not letting that rule your decisions. The reality is that we're talking about money, and money is an emotional topic. So it doesn't matter how smart you are, how much training, how much education you have, that emotion could sometimes, and I speak from experience, that emotion could sometimes get in the way of the logic, right? That's where giving it time, or having a professional, or having a third party can really be impactful. 51, lending to friends and family. This kind of goes back to the same argument of, do I take from my retirement account to pay for my child's college education, right? We all want to help friends and family, but you don't want to be in a situation where you're helping them and you're putting yourself into a bad spot, and you're going to be going right back to them in the future asking for help or asking for it back. 52, not teaching your kids about money, right? Unfortunately, kids do not learn a lot in school about money. A lot of that falls on us as parents to teach our children about money. And the sooner that you start, in my opinion, the sooner that you start, the more impactful that it can be. And really, really important life lessons can be learned from the child that can save them, a lot of pain in the future by just teaching them common kind of items. And folks, that is all that we have for today. Any questions before I wrap this up? Okay. So in review, avoiding common money mistakes by remembering to 1, manage your money, 2, prepare for setbacks, 3, stay on track, and 4, make financially sound decisions. All right. Everybody has a copy of today's presentation. So those 52 things we went through, everybody has a copy of that. Also, what's in that folder is an evaluation form. I would ask if each one of you could just take a minute or two now to fill out that evaluation form. The feedback is very well appreciated by myself and my partners. Yes, I'll get you another copy. Oh, I'm glad it was helpful. I'll get you a pen too, sir. And I'll be sticking around. So if anybody has questions,